two approaches that we are going to see today are self-directed learning, and as well we are going to see another lexical approach. So the final activity is an essay on competency-based English teaching, and it's for 5 December. The title of the work should be Implementing probably competency-based teaching or self-directed learning or lexical approach to teach English in, and then you are going to decide which school level you are going to design this proposal. It's like an essay, 3 pages maximum. And that essay should be as well written with APA 7 edition style. The title page, as you know it, then the introduction, half a page, in which we are going to present the chosen teaching approach with either competency-based, lexical, self-directed. Presentation should briefly include main pedagogical characteristics of that approach. Then you will provide a clear thesis statement in which you describe how the selected teaching approach can be either adopted or adapted in the English language syllabus that corresponds to the school level selected. Then, briefly, we are going to justify why this approach is relevant to teaching learning context, especially the one that you selected. Then the argument, it will take 2 pages long. The theoretical foundation that will contain the main teaching principles of the chosen approach, at least 3 peer-reviewed APA 7 edition references. Then the other section within the argument development is the pedagogical proposal or the pedagogical experience. Describe the context in which this proposal is addressed to. For instance, competency-based, notional, functional, what type of syllabus it's the one that you have in that teaching context. Then what's the educational level, students' general profile, for instance, their language level, their background, if they attend to a private, public school, more or less. Then you're going to explain the teaching methodology. In this case, what's the role of teachers, students, and instructional materials that can be used to adopt or adapt the syllabus to the approach. And of course, the type of learning activities proposed, for instance, I don't know, probably role plays, probably integrative tasks, I don't know, probably jigsaw activities, something like that, no? But you need to consider that the learning activities will or should match with the selected teaching approach. Just as an example that it doesn't match with. Imagine that you're going to select the competency-based approach. And then the activities that you selected were only translated literature passages. Remember that the fact of selecting translating literature passages belongs to the grammar translation method. So, especially that activity doesn't match with the pedagogical principles of the competency-based approach, you see? So that's why we need to select that the teaching activities match with the instructional approach. And then describe how the selected teaching approach can enhance students' learning outcomes that are stated in English language syllabus. So the English language syllabus has some outcomes, like for instance, students at the end of the course will be able to communicate either orally or in written form without hesitation, no? And then you say, well, this is the stated outcome, and By employing competency-based instruction, students will achieve a basic command of delivery, and then you justify, you try to explain that. Then arguments and evidence. You are going to explain why and how the selected teaching approach improves students' language learning. You may here cite some research evidence, at least 3 to 5 references, no? You may discuss potential challenges of adopting or adapting the teaching approach to the teach English according to the language syllabus. Mm, and for sure, how you will address those challenges. So, what knowledge or what skills the teacher should have in order to surpass those potential challenges. And then the conclusion, you may summarize key points that were discussed previously. You will say with another words the thesis statement. So you will give proof that this proposal is effective and that is possible to be implemented in that context. And finally, a reflection about its applicability and the opportunities that the application of the selected teaching approach will offer for you as a teacher. In this case, the opportunities, the application of the selected teaching approach, it offers to teachers professional development. For instance, by employing competency-based instruction, I think that I can strengthen my critical thinking skills as a professor of English, or I don't know, something like that. Then, in a separate page, you will include the references. As I mentioned, at least 3, but it can be more, and ensure proper in-text citation throughout the essay. These are the formal and writing requirements: academic style, argumentation, cohesion, and coherence. And then these are the 3 syllables that we are going to work with. This is for preparatoria, this is for secundaria, and this last one is for university. So, in order to develop this essay that is due for December 5th, you are going to get in groups of 3. And well, I I rephrase what I expected to say. You are going to form 3 groups. I know that you are 14. Probably you may divide into 4, 5, and 4, something like that, or 5, 4, and 4. I don't know. You may decide how you are going to work. You see? So far, a comment or a question?
No, not really. I think we already have uh, the groups, so
All,
we are like checking.
all right. Excellent. So now I think that I'm not really sure if I can do it like mm, something like that. Okay.
Here, do we have to send it in PDF or Word format?
In Word format, please.
Okay.
I will try to do it like then the other is
Professor, I just
yeah.
have a question. Is there any problem if we have already organized how to work with the programs? It's just that the previous class, well, at the end of the class,
Uh-huh.
I think it was Luisa who helped us to organize the groups, and then we divided the topics.
Oh, it's really nice to hear that. So forget about that. All right. Excellent.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So now we are going to start with the presentation of self-directed learning. So let's see. Tell me, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. Thank you so much. So now, when we talk about self-directed learning, we need to think that students would be responsible of their educational journey. Nevertheless, it's not their only individual responsibility. In fact, they need to start creating collaborative skills, not only among students, but also with the teachers. So the idea of self-directed learning is to ask students to take personal responsibility, but at the same time, a collaborative control of the learning processes in both spheres, in the cognitive side and in the contextual dimension. So, with the cognitive side, we as teacher may guide students with the development of learning strategies, learning procedures, and some strategies that will benefit self-directed learning are logs, learning logs. Additionally, have a schedule for organizing time, and especially if you give me the chance, Luis, I would like if you could tell me, as you were an online student, a BA online student, if to some extent you apply a strategy to organize your times for managing your personal life, managing the delivery of activities, and also devote time for reviewing theoretical contents.
Yeah, sure. Um, I did. In fact, I had this calendar with all my schedule, and so I try to organize my tasks in order to fulfill everything. So I don't even have access to it because it was in the old email. But basically, you have the Outlook calendar with the days, and you could um, insert an event. That's what literally it was, but you can just insert the name of a task and you can drag it out alongside the weekend, set a due date, set the start date as well. And so every day I try to work, I try to wake up, get up early and take a shower, have breakfast, sit down on the computer and to the best of my ability, try to finish the task in the time. So I had tried to do like one day, one task. Even if I needed the whole weekend to do that task, I tried to do one because it was like um the first semester we had, if I'm not mistaken, three subjects por área básica y también revalidé inglés uno, inglés 2. So it would have been five. Learning to learn, languages communication. Those are two more. Curriculum analysis and language as a system. So I had 7 subjects in the first semester. So of course we didn't have 7 subjects at a time. They were divided in the first 3 months and then in the second 3 months. But the the base were 4 at a time. And so I had to one task on Monday, one task on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And so I had to try to finish those in the day that they were assigned to, even if the due date was on the next week. So I could have my afternoons or nights, it really depends on the task, and my weekends free. And that's pretty much what I did, trying to fulfill that schedule.
I really appreciate your experience, Luis. As you could see, that is a vivid example of self-directed learning. So you combine the use of technology skills that you possess, but at the same time, you develop more technological skills. Also, you need to take an attitude towards, for instance, the use of the Outlook calendar. Sometimes it's like a general comment. Students, generally speaking, are not really used to use an agenda or a calendar to schedule all the activities. So, as teacher, we need to provide or coach them on how to do those calendars so students are aware of how much time they need to devote to the teaching material they are going to review, and also to organize the time they have left for finishing the homeworks, for instance. And in this case, contextual processes, such as some students may have only the cell phones for uh, accessing the digital platforms. So we need also to guide them on how to solve some only basic technical problems that may emerge when they are using their cell phones for accessing the digital platform. So what we need to focus with self-directed learning, it's an approach that, although it's not exclusively for online teaching, it can be to some extent also applied for face-to-face interaction. Nevertheless, self-directed learning, it's an approach that can be applied specifically for distant learning. However, the principle that should be considered for self-directed learning is autonomy, initiative, and also students' ability to manage their own educational experience. And by educational experience is, as Luis mentioned, a whole aspect. Control their own stress. Additionally, to have that sense of enjoyment of what they are doing within the educative resources, and at the same time, try to find a balance between school duties and their daily life responsibilities. So there are three major elements with self-directed foreign language learning. First of all, the attitude to activities, the use of technology, and to manage time. The second one is competence. What are the skills and strategies that students need for independent learning? Remember, here at the Universidad Veracruzana, we have a modality that it's quite similar to self-directed learning, in which students only attend to the self-access center, for instance, the USB self-access center, and they need to deliver some logs. They need to study by themselves the lessons of the course, and the only thing is to ask for assistance with some instructors for having, for instance, oral practice, or just to ask some strategies to be efficient in the listening activities. But this modality will require a lot of discipline from the part of the student. And obviously, the third element is the environment, the external conditions that foster autonomous learning. For instance, that they have access to internet, they have the materials really accessible for them, but at the same time, that they have an organized schedule or interacting. For instance, if there are some activities that requires participation at forums, that they can exchange their thoughts with their classmates on the due date, for instance. So the question that may arise is how EFL students develop self-directed learning. Well, remember that we comment in the previous slides that there are three elements: attitude, competence, and environment. So here we need to add a fourth aspect, that is technology. What are the digital tools and resources they have at their disposal? What other technological skills may require to develop? And that's exactly the teacher task, to create some, for instance, activities that enhance students' critical thinking skills in the use of technology. One example, although it's not exactly really similar or really adequate for this self-directed learning aspect, nevertheless, it may guide students on the use, for instance, of AI technologies. Remember the use of technologies, and nowadays AI technologies, it's something inevitable. Nevertheless, we need to make students aware of how they can exploit AI resources at their favor. Here in the example, something that you may face is one task is, for instance, if you are teaching students to develop a lesson plan, is the elements that constitute the lesson plan, and then you may ask them to create one. However, you need to take advantage and go one step forward. So here the idea is that you are going to teach how to ask to generative AI to generate ideas for having a clear mindset of how to develop a lesson plan devoted for a specific kind of students with the specific content. And then you need to emphasize that what in this case ChatGPT have created is not per se a lesson plan. Why? Because they are only some ideas that will have, or that will help the future teacher to really contextualize, knowing his her own students, the kind of activities and the resources they have at their disposal. So here the purpose is that you teach students how to create the prompts, and then make them conscious that what this generative AI produces is not the definite version, and that they shouldn't take it just as the final assignment. They are only some guidelines that may provide for the creation, in fact, of a lesson plan. This is just an example, and that's really close to the use of digital tools. So the teacher's responsibility when implementing self-directed learning is also to to guide students in the correct or ethic use of technological tools. So another aspect that is transcendental for self-directed learning, or SDL, we are also known as SDL, is the attitude. Students should cultivate a positive attitude towards taking charge of their own learning process, and also to be an active participant of this process. And now, again, Luis, I would like if you can share an experience of how you should or how you created those kind of positive attitudes towards your own learning process, and also when you were asked to interact probably via forums or another kind of activities. How did you develop that?
Uh, is it towards me again?
Yes, Luis, please.
Oh, okay. Can you repeat
Yes.
the question? It was quite large, sorry.
Don't worry. The idea is if you could give us an account on how you create a positive attitude towards your own learning, and as well, how did you take that positive attitude when you were required to participate in forums on other means of interaction?
That's uh that's uh that's a that's a tough question because uh by a start I'd say you can set yourself some rewards for yourself as you um go through your tasks and you try to fulfill everything and you complete and achieve your individual goals. You can set rewards for yourself. In my case, it was more like having my weekend free or my night free, so so I can do whatever I want. Watch TV, play video games, draw, play music, um, have a nice meal, stuff like that. Um, and about the technology use, well, you have to keep your mind open to try new things. You have to keep your mind open to sit down in front of your screen and like start touching things. What I mean is to explore the interface and look for something that has potential to be useful for your goals and for your means. So you cannot just, well, you can, of course can just like look for something specifically, look for something specific, but you can also uh, see what you have and take your time to explore what you have been given, and then try to look for things that might help you out. They are tools. They should be useful for something. And even if it doesn't look like it at first sight, if you take your time to look for something that they can be useful for, you can get your nice arsenal of tools for yourself. That's my answer. I think Naomi wanted to say something.
Oh, yes. At the end, I comment. Yes, Naomi. Thank you so much, Luis, for your comments. Go ahead, Naomi.
Yes, I was thinking in my own experience, learning through the virtual VA. And for me, I think something that helped me to keep my attitude through my self-learning, my self-learning was the virtual community I built with my other classmates. because some of us live here in Jalapa, but um, we never met actually, and some of others live in other states. So for me, that was one of the keys to keep my attitude, because through the WhatsApp group or the forums, we could build this small but strong community in which, even when the VA, the virtual VA, is quite alone, we can give us ourselves some company. So I think that was something good, because at the end, some of us uh, become real good friends. And even when we never met right face to face, but uh, for me, that was something that helped me to keep my attitude through to finish my virtual VA.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for also your comment, and especially something that we need to consider with self-directed learning is how we as teachers also create that sense of community with the other students, but as well with we as facilitators. That's especially the kind of role we teachers in a virtual community of learning should develop as a facilitator. In this case, it's not only to assume the traditional role of a director or something related to that. In this case, the facilitator role will enable us to create that rapport, that sense of belonging with our online students. And another aspect that we need to be aware is our, as teachers, our disposal for solving students' doubts and queries. Obviously, we also as teachers need to schedule a time for answering those questions. And at the same time, we will develop indirectly in our students that idea of, well, my teacher takes some time, but he always tries to solve me the questions I pose to him or her. And that's exactly another direct positive influence that we as teachers will create on students' willingness to engage in self-directed learning activities with the use of technology. I really appreciate both of you, your experiences, since they really match with what we are discussing of self-directed learning. Now, the other part to take into consideration for SDL is uh, building of competence. And these three aspects are really important for creating or for building that competence in students with SDL approach. First of all, learning management. In this case, how students create those strategies for learning independently within a schedule, within an organized manner. The second one is how we are going to, first, as teachers, select resources that are useful for students, but to some extent that they are interesting for them. And the third one, how as teachers will integrate technology in the learning process. Obviously, when we are talking about an online BA, we immediately consider that the use of technology is a must. Nevertheless, we as teachers shouldn't forget that not only technological resources will be technology. But at the same time, although it's quite controversial, but asking our students to have a written diary and probably ask them to write them instead of a word processing in a notebook it's another kind of technology they will employ. And why? Because behind asking them to write down with manuscript, they will also activate their neural connections. And that's the other purpose of employing another kind of technology. In this case, the classical one, the notebook and the pencil. Now, when we are creating online environments, we need to remember the supportive aspect. And the supportive aspect should also be identified in the kind of, nowadays, technological tools that we include in the learning environment. For instance, we may think that it's really useful to include within the online platform a resource, I don't know, probably a word wall, a Kahoot, in this case that we are talking about learning a language. It's so effective. Probably we as teachers consider that it's also fun for students. Nevertheless, what happens if we have a student who has visual disability or who have a hearing problem? So when we are considering that aspect, obviously we need to know in advance the aspects or the disabilities our students may have. We need to take that aspect into consideration to make the learning, the online or technological resources accessible for those students, and obviously in general. But we need also to consider the selection of that material that is accessible for those students. So we shouldn't assume per se that technological resources will facilitate learning. We need to bear in mind that aspect of accessibility as well. And then, as I have mentioned, technology is a key factor in SDL. Obviously, we need to consider that access to those technological resources is not difficult. And additionally, there are other technological resources that should be considered into account. For instance, those massive open access courses or MOOCs, they will complement our teaching of a specific topic. Additionally, something that we need to consider is how students perceive the usefulness and the friendliness of that technological resource. Apart from considering that aspect of accessibility, is that our technological resource is not really difficult to be executed either in a computer or in a cell phone. Remember that when we are taking into consideration self-directed learning, some students may not have at their disposal a computer, but only with their cell phone they will work. So we need to bear in mind that aspect of usefulness. And finally, we need to rethink how we are selecting those technological resources. Despite we may create a checklist or we may follow some parameters, we as teachers need to consider that technological resources that will be part of our course shouldn't only be selected by a tendency, but imagine that we are now students. We need to think, should I use it effectively? Can the interface is easy to be executed in whatever digital tool? For instance, a cell phone, a tablet, or a laptop. That's another aspect that we need to consider when selecting those technological resources. And of course, something that we shouldn't take for granted is how learners accept the use of technology. what are their attitudes about that, then what's the perceived usefulness they have for those technological resources, and for sure, the conditions that may facilitate the use of those resources. As an example, you have Eminus. Sometimes Eminus is not working properly, and then probably you may have another online platform. I don't know, Moodle. Nevertheless, sometimes Moodle is not accessible unless you pay a fee for its use. So, does your institution have the affordance for buying a license of Moodle? Alternatively, you can use, for instance, Classroom. However, you need to bear in mind what are the advantages and the limitations Classroom have. You need to remember that the selection of the platform is another important aspect when implementing SDL. So, as a summary, what are the main factors that influence EFL students' SDL? The first, technology-based learning space, something that enables autonomy, flexibility, and also commitment with the learning. Second, the attitudes towards technology use. If the students have a positive attitude and also they may have positive experience using technology, it's much well, there is not 100% security, but at least you have some kind of security that students will get involved in the use of technology for SDL approach. Then, what are the facilitating conditions they have? In this case, if they have the technological resources at their disposal. And finally, to consider technological complexity aspects, such as the friendliness or the opposite in the use of a digital educative platform. And finally, what need to consider when using technology for SDL? First, that there should be a reciprocal relationship between the user and the technology. When I say a reciprocal relationship, I mean that the user knows how to use the platform, also how they can solve basic malfunctioning of the platform. Also, if there is accessibility for asking for help, if there is a major obstacle in the functioning of the digital platform, and for sure, if student has like that attitude towards not blaming on his her impossibility to deliver a task to the platform, but also that he is willing to recognize if he was his lack of giving a systematic trace of their activities throughout a calendar, throughout, I don't know, an agenda, no? That's more or less the explanation of that reciprocal relationship between technology and the user, in this case, the learner. So, how students think technology impacts collaborative learning? In this case, the enhanced knowledge sharing that may allow for students the use of technology within SDL approach. In this case, as your classmates mentioned, when you create a sense of community and then you exchange your points of view, your own learning experience with other students and also with the teacher, in fact, those are the conditions for enhancing knowledge sharing. And this is also another important aspect of SDL. So if students have that experience and positive impression of that knowledge sharing, they will feel committed to SDL. And for sure, if some technical difficulties emerge and students know how to solve those difficulties, they will feel secure of SDL approach. So, as everything, there are some difficulties. For sure, discipline is a really big constraint because if students don't have a plan, they won't follow a systematic order of the activities and they later will procrastinate in the delivery of activities. Secondly, they need to manage time because they need to organize their daily life activities and the school work. Also, this could be possible if they mm, have developed self-management skills. If not, it would be quite difficult for them. And for sure, the other aspect that may be present is a feeling of isolation. When studying independently, some students miss social interaction that is possible with face-to-face or with online sessions. So this is another obstacle that may make impossible to use SDL approach if students don't have previous experiences on working on their own without social interaction. And I think that's the end of this presentation of self-directed learning. Before we continue with questions, I would like to listen to any one of you if you have a comment, something that you find interesting for this approach. Yes, go ahead, Rene.
Well, I gotta say that it happened to me, especially during the pandemic. Regardless that I teach with younger students, they manage to understand technology very well, and also when they don't have the technological tools that they needed, they didn't have a really good internet or a computer. They managed to do it all with a old cell phone, and you mentioned like this community, this common ground that they have, so they want to work by themselves but also like in a group. And I realized that sometimes they don't know how to do something, but they don't ask me. They ask each other how to solve a problem. Hey, even the easiest things for us, like, hey, yeah, I don't have an scanner. No, but you can't. You can take a picture with an app that it makes the picture to a PDF instantly. Some things are like this that, especially during the pandemic, they managed to overcome. It was very interesting and very helpful for the parents and for the kids because now that they have developed these skills that at some point might be helpful.
Totally agree with you, Rene. And especially, I don't know, but probably sometimes I don't want to sound quite rude in my comment. Nevertheless, sometimes parents don't visualize the potential aspect it may have, not only the use of technology, but if they parents also allow the teacher give some hints to use technology in favor of education of their kids. This is something crucial for implementing SDL. if parents give us the opportunity to give some hints, to give like some recommendations, but it's quite difficult in this aspect. Thank you so much, Renee. I don't know if someone else who would like to share or to add something else. All right. If not, we are going to start with sharing the answers of the first questionnaire on students' perception of self-directed learning. The first question was, how is self-directed learning defined in the SDL and CL section of the text? So who has this answer for that question?
I have the first one, Mr.
Okay, go ahead, Lupita.
Okay, well, according to the text, the SEL is defined as the learner's psychological processes that are purposely and consciously controlled or directed for the purpose of gaining knowledge and understanding, solving problems, and developing the skills. In this case, as you mentioned, Doctor, this approach emphasizes the personal autonomy, the self-management, and also the learner is the one in charge of having control of their own progress. And also, this enables the individuals to diagnose probably their learning needs, to set goals, and to evaluate their own outcomes.
Exactly. So here the key word is be responsible of your own learning path. Thank you so much, Lupita, for this answer. Now, question number two, what advantages do the text mention teachers and students have when engaging in self-directed learning?
That's my teacher.
Go ahead, Mafer.
The text explains that self-directed learning benefits both students and teachers. And for students, SEL helps them take responsibility for their own learning and develop cognitive and problem-solving strategies, increase motivation, practice self-monitoring, and participate more effectively in collaborative tasks. Basically, this approach makes students be more autonomous and independent. And for teachers, the benefit is it's that student become more autonomous and then require less direct instruction and are better prepared for using technology in a meaningful way. So the student even suggests that developing SEL without technology first leads to better learning in technology supported environment.
Thank you so much, Fred. So here, what we need to bear in mind is students need to be conscious of the conditions needed for a better use of SDL, and as well, teachers need to know their strengths and the areas opportunities they may have for getting a better benefit of SDL. Now, question number three, describe some challenges or barriers students face when trying to learn independently.
That's Danny's question, but I don't know if she is here,
I think,
but I can answer it if
yes,
she isn't. Yes? Okay, thanks. Well, some of the main challenges that students may face are that it requires high level of self-management and that many learners have not developed yet. In my own experience, I was thinking in my teenager students, and that could be quite difficult for them because they need a big range of alternative learning strategies to use when they encountering difficulties. So SDL also demands strong motivation and goal orientation and self-regulation And students who lacked these traits may struggle to guide their own learning effectively. And also, learners must make informed choices about their learning paths and consistently monitor their own progress. And in this case, tasks can be difficult without well-developed metacognitive skills. And these demands highlight why many students may experience barriers when they attempting to learn independently.
Something that is very important here is the fact that how as teachers will make students aware of their own learning progress. Also, how as teachers may guide students to be responsible of those learning processes. And at the end, although it's quite beyond, but it's really interconnected, how we as teachers make self-assess our role as facilitators and to sometime as guidance for enhancing students self-driven learning processes. All right, thank you so much for this answer. Now we have question number 4. What is the relationship between self-directed learning and collaborative learning that is mentioned in the text?
That's mine. And well, both are complementary because collaboration helps students to develop skills necessary for self-direction, and self-direct learnings engage more effectively in collaborative tasks. That means that this collaborative learning promotes the self-directions, and when students work collaboratively, they must take responsibility, manage their tasks, negotiate roles, and make decisions all together. So these behaviors, as you already mentioned, Doctor, are key components of self-direct learning. And well, self-direct learners function better in collaborative contexts because students who already show these self-management skills that are planning, monitoring, evaluating their learning, tend to participate more effectively in these collaborative settings. And well, uh, technology in this case creates the condition that encourage independence and facilitate the interaction. Uh, because in that case, well, they can sharing, they can co-creating, or they can give feedback, right? And in both approaches, the center on the learner's autonomy and the active participation. Students take this active role in constructing their own knowledge. So learning is not passive. It requires the initiative and the communication and the reflection. So both approaches promote deeper engagement and ownership of learning. I think that's why they are connected, and that's the relationship between those two approaches.
Thank you so much for this explanation, Naomi. And in fact, SDL cannot be disconnected from cooperative learning, and especially because, as we could listen, sorry, collaborative learning, especially because when we are going to ask students to be responsible of their own learning process, of course, we need to guide them and we need to form like a net in which not only with teachers but also with other students can support in terms of um managing some misunderstandings, for instance, or probably to give some support, like cheering they are doing on the right track, and of course, like establishing good relationship in terms of asking for help, providing that help. In that way, students will notice that self-directed learning is not only their own process, but is a supportive process. Thank you so much. Now, question number 5. What role does the educational environment, in this case, teachers, resources, and peers, play in students' ability to learn autonomously?
That's my question. So, they all three play a critical role in students' ability. Teachers are responsible for developing students' abilities to plan, to self-monitor and self-evaluate their own learning. As you said, the study, for example, the study that you sent us, uh, shows that students have to acquire first the SDL and the collaborative learning skills. The study focuses on that they have to learn them first on in face-to-face context before using technology and applying the skills in virtual environments. Uh, you also mentioned that teachers all design the activities and that those activities encourage collaboration and self-direction, like group discussions, like what we're doing now, self-based project-based tasks, also reflective exercises, and they can also use the technology is as a cognitive tool since they have to learn it and master it and think about how it can work for them rather than just a productivity tool. Just like this is works for a presentation thing, for example. Um, Also, next is peers, which also have as much influence because students build knowledge together through discussion, through shared ideas, giving feedback to themselves, answering doubts among themselves, like Renee mentioned. That social interaction helps individuals, in this case students, um, find maybe gaps in their own knowledge, and that motivates them to keep learning, and that motivation directs them to uh, learn by themselves, to self-directed learning. Uh, in the ideal settings, collaborative settings, students can be exposed to diverse perspectives, and that will encourage project solving strategies, and then they can internalize those
Thank you so much, Luis.
independently.
Uh,
Oh, sure.
all right. Thank you so much, Luis, for this answer. So, as we could listen to you, teachers, resources, and peers are considered like a tangible triangle that will be part of self-directed learning. And why I mentioned that triangle relationship. Without resources, teachers cannot interact with students or peers. And also, peers cannot interact just per se without teachers' guidance. So that's how we are going to establish that relationship. And then the efforts of teachers should be oriented to develop in students that sense of autonomy. So thank you so much for answer this question. Question number 6. What are some insights provided by research about ICT supported learning environments and CL environments?
That's my question. And well, according to the article, an ICT environment enhances autonomy, engagement, and access to resources, something that you have previously mentioned, Professor. So in ICT, classrooms that are supported by ICT, students have access to face-to-face and technology-based settings. However, we may find some challenges because some students may have difficulties when trying to adapt to these blended learning environments. So that's one of the disadvantages or challenges. Regarding a communicative learning environments, CL environments, learners have the opportunity to interact and involve in a social negotiation to get deeper understanding and construct knowledge, something that also my classmates have already mentioned. They are going to be exchanging ideas, opinions, sharing information, providing feedback among themselves. To sum up, well, as students are involved in their learning process while working in collaborative learning environments, they are going to have a greater understanding of the topic they are learning. So these foster communication skills, social interaction, and with these two approaches, ICT and CL, when they are combined, we have the opportunity of creating a rich environments, rich learning context that strengthen autonomy and that hopefully will promote equal participation. So that's basically it.
Thank you so much for the answer, Jennifer. So, as we could see, ICT, although they are not exclusively a tool for self-directed learning, but it's a fundamental aspect that should promote collaborative learning as well. And remember that we as teachers have also a central role in that process. All right. And finally, question number 7. Which are some technologies means afforded by the ICT supported environments for self-directed learning used by students?
Uh, yeah, it's mine.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, in ICT supported environments, students rely on a variety of digital tools that strengthen their self-direct learning, including learning management systems, online courses, multimedia resources like videos, ebooks, podcasts, and mobile apps that allow them to study at their own pace, to clarify doubts, and expand their knowledge. And well, and also they use organizational tools like digital planners or progress tracking apps to set goals and monitor their learning. And well, these technologies give learners flexible access to information, promote autonomy, and enhance both individual and collaborative learning processes.
All right, thank you so much. So here, as we could see, ICT supported environments will be a tool that can be exploited. In this case, students compromise for their own learning, but as usual, we as teachers need to guide our students in how they can use ICT tools for their self-directed learning. All right. Thank you so much for this sharing of ideas. That is the self-directed learning approach. Now, we will see the other approach that is known as the lexical approach. And as its name says, lexical approach will provide students with the basis for not only be able to express orally, but also in the written form. So, lexical approach is commonly based on teaching students prefabricated expressions, which are known as lexical chunks, And those lexical chunks should be the ones used in authentic communication. So the idea is that students acquire ready-made phrases, collocations, idiomatic expressions, formulaic sequences that native speakers use fluently. That is more or less the main ideas behind lexical approach. Now, remember that despite the term lexical will only refer to vocabulary, we shouldn't take for granted that indeed those lexical chunks also have a grammar aspect. So that's why we can say the lexical approach reframe grammar teaching. So lexical approach treats language as mainly multi-word lexical chunks, not grammar first instruction. In this case, throughout lexical chunks, we may include some grammatical patterns. For instance, when we are teaching basic English, we may create the first chunk like I have, and then you complement breakfast, dinner, supper, at, and then you may change the time in which you are having those activities. This is a classical example of how you can use the lexical component for teaching, in fact, the grammar aspect of I have lunch at 7 a.m. Then the purpose of using lexical approach is also to enhance students' fluent output. And for sure, instead of just teaching the grammar rule of you need to place first subject, then the verb, and then the complement, you are showing students that learning English is a matter of learning how to use chunks of language. And this is also taken from some corpus patterns. In this case, they are frequency guide syllabus. That is, in other words, how language users employ language in a common way. So, lexical approach gives a primary place to those aspects, to chunks. And what are the outcomes of giving a primary place to chunks? First, building blocks. Chunks functions as core communication pieces. So when you are teaching some fixed phrase, students will perceive as a complete unit of meaning. Then it boosts fluency. Students shouldn't spend so much time to produce orally a discourse. And for sure, it also emphasizes cognitive economy. It's like less effort for producing language in comparison with rules or grammatical governed production. So when you are going to teach vocabulary via chunks, we need to follow these aspects. First of all, we need to treat lexis as a core, not just as grammar elements. Then we need to know this in context. We need to guide attention to phrases in, for instance, dialogues, authentic texts, something that it's quite difficult because as teachers we are not really used to is the use of corpora. Corpora means a collection of expressions that are typically from a specific social cultural context. Then, lexical approach promotes inductive learning by observing how language works, making some hypotheses, then experiment with their use and correct if we make mistakes. So in this case, also lexical churn goes hand by hand with experiential learning approach, an approach developed by David Kolb. And finally, Lexical chunks can be taken from extensive input. So that input could be a listening passage or a reading passage as well. Then how we can apply in the classroom the lexical approach. First, we should provide authentic input. That's why we as teachers can take that authentic input from Corpora. Then we need to design real tasks, listening and reading chunks, and the idea of those listening and reading chunks should be like students notice how some expressions transmit meaning and that they do not really question for the grammatical aspect of those chunks. Obviously, we as teachers need to some extent teach the grammatical aspect, but this is not our main purpose when we are using the lexical approach. Also, recycling. The idea is that chunks should be used more than once. We need to find some opportunities so students use again the chunk we teach in the first class, for instance. Obviously, we need to guide students to notice chunks. In this case, highlight collocations in speech and in written text. Then we need to get used of students to inductive work. Inductive work should be evident when we observe patterns of language, how some specific forms are produced, and then students may test their hypothesis of how language works. And for sure, we need to have some dictionary at our disposal. And the other aspect that it's quite difficult because we as teachers are not really used to use corpora is with the concordancer skill. The concordancer in a corpus, it's how words collocate within a given context and then see the different possibilities of combination of those expressions. For sure, lexical approach have some advantages over traditional approaches or methods. We need to emphasize vocabulary first and then the grammar explanation. Then we are going to focus on meaning rather than on form. For sure, the chunks are taken from real life, so the expressions are taken from everyday context. We are going to emphasize with students formulaic fluency. The idea is students get used to produce some fixed expressions without hesitation. Obviously, as teachers, we need to adapt to learners' needs and we are going to design our lessons plans with the lexical approach by prioritizing the most frequent expressions according to the topic we are going to teach. And for sure, it also gives affective support since it promotes lower anxiety levels because students will feel confident with what they are producing, with what they are using those expressions. So, what are the pedagogical implications to the lexical approach? Well, this approach shifts from presentation practice production to learner discovery of chunks. Second, facilitation. So, teachers enable the chunks identification by some hints, highlighting some expressions. Obviously, we are going to emphasize the significance or the meaning of those lexical chunks, and later we are going to explain the grammatical aspects that are embedded in those lexical chunks. The design of activities should promote awareness, the use of those lexical chunks to practice with those lexical chunks and to produce written or oral texts using the lexical chunks. Then we need to change our view of errors. In this case, we need to consider that making errors is something normal. Nevertheless, we need to enhance students' awareness on not committing that error again and again. And for sure, in order to help our students not to commit that mistake, we need to create like a strategy. In this case, asking students to develop like a vocabulary list in which they will organize some lexical chunks according to a specific field or to a specific criteria of organization. So in some, lexical approach should promote in students the recognition of language usage as a kind of formulaic expressions that will be said because this is the way how language users express their thoughts. And by assuming that idea, students won't feel really stressed. Nope, really stressed. The when producing language. Let me check because I have a question on the chat. Between data-driven learning. Ah, yes. Lexical approach only emphasize the use of some given expressions. In this case, the most recurrent expressions according to a topic. I don't know, for instance, the topic of giving personal presentation. The most recurrent chunk is my name is, I am years old, I am a, and then you give the profession. So this is some examples of lexical chunks. They are prefabricated expressions that are of common use. And then data-driven learning will emerge, in this case, from corpus. So data-driven will be retrieved from concordances. Corpus, language corpuses will be, well, according to special necessities. For instance, if you want to learn or to teach language for an academic purpose, for a survival purpose. And then one of the main differences between data-driven learning is that this one, data-driven learning, will require from you as a teacher well training on how to exploit a corpus. Whereas lexical approach won't really need that training. And of course, with data-driven learning, you can also address the efforts for students to be able to use those corpus to complement their learning process. In contrast, with lexical approach, you will provide those chunks and then you may give hints for students to recognize chunks in another text they are reading or in text they are listening to. This is more or less the difference between those approaches. So before we continue with the questions, I would like to listen if someone else has a comment or a question uh, about, no, you're welcome, about the lexical approach. Yes, Naomi, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but my students are in recess. That's why the noise. I was thinking, I was wondering if we can, I'm interested in explore the language learning through different literary texts. So in my first proposal, it will be used some lullabies or rhymes or something that native use for learn their own language. It will be possible with this approach.
Yes, for sure. With lexical approach, yes, because the first part is that you're going to check some lexical units that will be identified in those literary texts. For instance, the use of some common expressions, and then based on those common expressions, you may enhance students' creative language. Probably to some extent, meaning won't be the essence of creating rhymes. Nevertheless, the sound effect that may cause on the hearer, and why not later when you try to give sense, meaning to those words, sometimes the possible translation could be funny or can be weird. So you are activating your students' interest in creating to some extent just in the phonic part, but later you may raise their awareness on the fact that creation or creative side should also match a meaning transmission.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. So now let's go with the questions on the lexical approach method. Based on the reading passage, the first question. Explain the main difference between traditional structural syllabus and the lexical approach. Why did the lexical approach emerge as a reaction to earlier methods?
Well, I was the one in charge of that question.
Go ahead.
Mm, Well, what I found in the text that you sent us, it was the following. The main difference between traditional structural syllabuses and the lexical
Yeah.
approach lies in their focus and organization of language learning. Traditional structural syllabuses emphasize teaching grammatical rules and structures in a segmented, rule-based manner, whereas the lexical approach centers on teaching and learning chunks of language, what you have just said a few minutes ago, such as fixed phrases and collocations as the fundamental units of the communication. That's like the main difference. Well, in summary, while traditional methods focus on grammar and isolated vocabulary, the lexical approach emphasizes the importance of lexical chunks emerging as a more naturalistic and corpus-based way of teaching language for more fluent communication.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. So here we could see that lexical approach emphasizes real communication in a natural setting. So with the use of some expressions, we may try to enhance that awareness with our students. Thank you so much. Now, the other question, number two, describe the concept of lexical chunks. What types of chunks are typically included, and why are they considered central to the lexical syllabus?
Yeah, that's my question.
Go ahead.
So, lexical chunks are multi-word units and function as a single polyphony elements in communication. They can differ, as some of them allow, they are more flexible, and others don't allow substitutions. For example, on the other hand, that's a fixed phrase, and others like make a long story short, which is an idiom. So there are different types of chunks, such as individual words, polywords, could be compounds word as a hot dog, phrasal verbs like run out of something, and binomials and trimonials. Also idioms, for instance, once in a blue moon, similes like a fish out of water, proverbs, actions speak louder than words, sentence frames that like not only but also that they are fixed, institutionalized utterance like thank you, welcome, collocations such as consist of, made of, have coffee, do homework. And well, these chunks are considered important because they represent the most frequent and useful building blocks of language in use. And well, if you teach them, learners will have the chance to reflect on how native speakers process and produce language, and that the vocabulary are not isolated words, that they are supposed to be combined in a certain way to foster authentic communication.
That is exactly the purpose of the lexical approach, to emphasize authentic communication. Thank you so much, Luisa. These are the names the type of chunks receive. Obviously, we are not going to teach students that kind of names. Nevertheless, we as teachers need to know how we are going to classify the chunks that we are going to teach. Thank you so much. Now, question number three. How does corpus linguistics support the foundations of the lexical approach? Provide at least two insights that corpus data contributes to the implementation of lexical teaching.
Okay, that's my question, teacher.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, today I'm going to explain how corpus linguistic support the lexical approach, in what specific insights it offers for implementing lexical teaching. Well, first, corpus linguistic shows that real language use does not only depend only in grammar rules. Instead, it relies on repeated lexical patterns, chunks. In everyday communication, people use the ready-made pieces for language far from the single grammatical structures. Corpus study and also explain how frequently these chunks appear and how they typically occur together. This confirms the main idea of lexical approach language, that is essential lexis with grammar, which means teaching should focus on meaningful lexical units that function as ready-made building blocks. Another important point is that corpus evidence reflects how people actually speak and write in authentic context. This allows teachers to make instructional decisions based on real examples. And the two concrete insights that corpus data contributes is the first one, frequency help teachers choose the most important chunks. Corpus research tells us which words and expressions appear most often in real communication. This helps teachers select high values chunks so students learn practical and useful language. And secondly, corpus data shows collocations and usage patterns. Corpora reveal which words naturally go together, which combinations sound unnatural. Over here there is one example that says that we learn that people say strong T rather than powerful T. So teaching these patterns helps the students produce more fluent and natural sounding language. And that's it.
Thank you so much for this answer. So, as we could see, the idea of having first as teachers that knowledge of corpus linguistics will enhance our teaching practices. So when we are giving our lessons, we can select exactly some fixed expressions, and then with those expressions, we may see the value of reflecting on the meaning of those chunks and how the meaning of those chunks will enable our students understanding when producing language, but also when they find those expressions in a written text. Then question number 4. Summarize Sinclair's 1991 distinction between open choice principle and idiom principle. Why the idiom principle considered more realistic for language production?
Okay, so that is my question. So related to the open choice principle, so according to Sinclair, the open choice principle views language as a series of grammatical slots in which the speaker can actually select one word at a time. So we already have some examples, and here we say, for instance, the doctor crossed the street. A speaker is seen as choosing. Choosing in this case, I mean, in that sentence, the speaker can know what the subject is, the verb is, and the object as well. So each position in this case allows many possible choices, and this model assumes a nearly unlimited number of combinations. Also, Sinclair argues that this creates too much freedom, making it an unrealistic explanation of how people can actually produce language in real time. On the other side, we have the idiom principle that proposes that speakers rely on prefabricated ready-made phrases, or how we call it, chunks, that they are stored in memory. For example, as my uh, classmate Lisa had already said it, fixed expressions, for example, hot dog, of course, common patterns as such as a lot of, a piece of, and predictable multi-word sequences such as if I were you, I would. Uh-huh. So rather than assembling sentences word by word, speakers draw on these chunks as single units. So they don't see it as the one that I said before, like subject, verb, or object. So they see the whole unit as it is. Um, uh, the second question that we had, so why is this idiom principle considered more realistic for language production? So it's more important because it reduces the cognitive load. It matches evidence from corpora. It explains fluent and more natural sounding language. And it also aligns with psycholinguistic research. So those might be some of the main principles why the idiom principle is considered more realistic for language production.
Thank you so much, Victor, for this distinction. As theoretically speaking, Sinclair's trying to mention, in other words, when we are selecting the lexical chunks to teach, we may try to select because we have a specific topic to teach or because the frequency of use. When we have a topic to teach, we adhere to the first open choice principle. And then when we are trying to emphasize the most frequent use of chunks, we adhere to the idiom principle. And then the idiom principle, as Victor mentioned, it's how we use some expressions in daily life communication. Thank you so much for this question. Now we go with question number 5. Discuss one major criticism of the lexical approach that is mentioned in the text. Why do some scholars argue that it is not a complete language teaching approach?
Okay, that would be mine.
Go ahead.
So, I was reading a lot of these texts. I have to read it and reread it. It was quite interesting. So, on the first part, first we have to understand what lexical approach is. So we have all these prefabricated expressions, multi-word units, collocations, idioms, sentence frames, and all of these. But and it helps a lot in this corpus of linguistics, right? So, but what is the thing that, according to Jean-Pierre Racine, who is the author of the text, that it truly doesn't specify how this language competence may be achieved. So, in fact, when some schools try to implement a strictly lexical language program, they have been unsuccessful. So, like, the main criticism about this is that it doesn't truly explain how learning can achieve language competence, which is like the main purpose of learning a language. And then the second questions ask, why do some scholars argue that it's not a complete language approach? Here I found three main um, answers. That would be that probably is not based on a complete language theory. The quote is not actually an approach to language learning at all. In my opinion, it's because it lacks of a theoretical framework. And also another thing is that this approach emphasizes the natural input. However, it relies a lot on awareness raising activities. So, how do you become a competent speaker with natural language acquisition that if you are only working on these repetitive, probably chunks, right? And also that, as I said before, the schools that try to apply this on lexical programs have been unsuccessful. I was a little bit unsatisfied about this answer, so I look it up for a little bit more of information. So, according to an author called Widowson, um, well, this approach is very good. However, it only relies on the memorization of chunks. But how can you truly develop a flexible language use? And also, there is an author called Thunberry that it says that truly underestimate the use of the grammar. Yeah. So chunks are very helpful for fluency. Yeah, they help you to answer directly in a good manner. However, grammar helps you with accuracy and fluency. And also, the lexical approach does not adequately address how learners develop grammatical competence over time. I kind of realized that, for example, with CVLT, here you have this critical thinking, and you try to use your knowledge to create something, and this is like quite the opposite. You have some structures. It would be very useful to understand, for example, the idioms, right? But how do you develop your language, your vocabulary in a realistic way? It's like you said in presentations. Um, Instead of asking how are you, and I have faced this problem that you ask how are you, and all your students answer I'm fine, thank you, and you this robotic uh, answer does show you that they have this idea of how to answer, but doesn't truly understand everything. And for example, for me, I have tried to ask, "Hey, how are you?" And they give you a feeling and emotion. And if they are always saying, for example, "How are you?" I'm happy. I ask them a different way, or "Oh, I am hot today. Are you hot? Right? So that would be my answer.
A really complete answer. Thank you so much, Renee. And here, as we could see, lexical approach has been criticized of not being like a complete approach, since to some extent we can also consider like an approach for reflecting on how to use some specific aspects of language. However, as you mentioned, it's not an approach that directly emphasize some grammatical aspects. In fact, they are embedded into the chunks, and that's why sometimes this approach is not too much adequate for when we try to emphasize the grammar cognitive aspects. Thank you so much for this answer. And now we go with question number 6. What changes does the lexical approach imply for classroom practice and the teacher role? Describe at least 3 pedagogical implications presented in the chapter or in the text.
Okay, so that would be me. So the teacher, it is the major input source. However, he or she does shift from a traditional role to a facilitator in lexical approach, and as many approaches nowadays do so. And they also allow students to discover language by themselves, but obviously with guidance. That would be the first pedagogical implication. Then the usage of both receptive, for example, listening or reading skills, and productive skills like speaking and writing. And an example of this could be how we students are able to recognize lexical chunks in real or authentic context, but also that would be receptive, but also using said chunks correctly or appropriately. So that would be putting them in practice, productive skills. And last, that we as teachers can provide our students with strategies that align with autonomous thinking. So, for example, well, this will help them to with this approach because they are able to develop critical thinking, and that helps them discover language and remember lexical chunks.
In other words, as you mentioned, it's the teacher's duty, the teacher's task to be able to transform the way he or she teaches the lessons, definitely. Thanks so much for this answer. And finally, number 7, how can concordancing activities and corpus informed tasks help learners acquire lexical chunks? Provide one concrete example of an activity from the text and explain how it supports learning.
Okay, that's my question.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, concordancy activities and corpus-informed tasks facilitate the students to acquire lexical chunks. And this is made by allowing them to discover patterns and usage restrictions and contextual meanings of words that are used in authentic phrases. The task also allows the students to analyze real language examples in the context. Um, Therefore, the students have better retention and understanding of lexical units. The text describes one activity that it's when the students have difficulty defining a word and by their own, and they have to understand it better in a context. The word is, for example, system. So the students are presented concordance lines, and these concordance lines are cut into strips, and they have to group them according to different categories. And for example, there are different usages such as financial systems, computer systems, rail systems, heating systems, even government institutions like health system. And finally, the students compared what they had made and with answers with a corpus-informed dictionary. This activity supports learning, encouraging students to identify different collocations and to contextualize their use. And furthermore, the students recognize the different combinations of words in natural language. Um, I think that the main positive thing about this is that it promotes better use of understanding of these lexical chunks, and this is much better than just memorizing this is vocabulary because they are applying in a context.
So, as you mentioned here, the most important part is that you, as a teacher, uh, although it's sometimes taken for granted, you get used to exploit the use of dictionary not only as a tool for looking for specific meanings, but also as a resource for enhancing students' uh, critical thinking in the way how they are going to look for collocations, look for the adequate meaning according to the context, and of course, that they perceive the dictionary not only as a resource for clarifying meaning, but also to acquire, well, to learn, and later by constant use to acquire some fixed expressions. Thank you so much for this insightful sharing of knowledge of the lexical approach.